computers in these cars these days are pretty good at trying to narrow down the problem. And our codes are indicating that we've got a lean problem at idle. Not above idle, but only at idle. So as we think about this, oftentimes when we have a lean code, we're thinking about an air leak of some kind. Now, if it's at idle, if you understand how it works, when you're above idle, the throttle plate is open and you're bringing in a lot of air. But at idle, the throttle plate is closed and there's a very controlled amount of air. And that's when we're lean. That's when we're setting our code. So the first thing we did after taking off the engine cover was to look around and listen and see if we can see anything very obvious. A lot of times vacuum lines are off or collapsed or rotted or have a crack in it. We couldn't visually see anything and we couldn't hear anything. So now it's time to test. So if we can't find anything visually or hearing some type of an air leak problem, we've got to do something else. Let's do a propane test. What I mean by that is we're going to take a propane tank that has a little valve on it and we're going to put propane all around here. If the suction brings that propane in, the computer ought to see it and adjust it on fuel trim. So let's set the scanner up first before we do this. So we've got all our data up on the scanner, but I want to customize this because I don't want to look at everything. So we're going to hit custom, deselect everything. What do I want to look at? Well, I want to see what's happening to fuel trim. So I'm going to scale this up. So I want bank 1 sensor 1 02 millivolts and bank 2 sensor 1 millivolts. I also want short term bank 1, short term bank 2, and I also want long term bank 1 and long term bank 2. Now I'm going to graph all of that. Now as this paints across here, let me tell you why I'm choosing this. First off, we're at idle now. The computer said the problem was at idle and we're at idle. We can see that the oxygen sensors on bank 1 are switching and they're going down somewhere around 50 up over 800. Bank 2 is the same way. It's switching normally going down to 60 up over 800. So it's pretty normal. Now let's look at short-term fuel trim. If you look right here, it's 19, 21, 23. Now an acceptable range is 10% or less. So this is too high. On this bank, we're about 14, 16. It's a little bit too high. But before you focus too much on that, look at long term. Long term on bank 1 is at 25. It's 25 and it's just holding there. That's 25%. That's pretty maxed out for the long term to be able to adjust fuel. The same thing on this bank at 25%. Now short term will not set a code. Short term is the fast corrections to fuel trim, fuel adjustments, but it's not going to set a code. But every time that short term maxes out, the long term will ratchet up one time and try and correct it over a longer period of time. If it cannot do it, and if long term goes over 10%, it'll set the code. Now we're looking at this car with the problem. Our long term is maxed out at 25% with the problem. So what we're going to do, try to do here is interject some propane, and if we can find it, if we can find the leak and we start adding fuel, the computer should see that and the short term should come down immediately and long term should come down over a period of time.
The O2s are switching, which means that the PCM is controlling the fuel mixture, but it had to take the long-term fuel trim to 25% to do it.
So we're going to open up our bottle of propane and we've got this wand. The wand has a valve we can open up too, and I like to listen to it to make sure I can hear the propane coming out, or you can smell it. Now what we want to do is just wave this all over the engine and watch the short-term fuel trim and see if we see a change. Now a place that we usually suspect is anytime there's a vacuum line or a lot of times around the intake gasket. So this is just kind of a quick test. We're just going to pop it around here and see if we see anything changing. Follow your intake. Sometimes around the injectors. Sometimes with this wand, you can stick it down underneath the intake to get the underside. Any place you see a vacuum line, you might think I'm moving kind of fast, but it should be pretty instantaneous. That computer can adjust fuel fast. Go around to the back side. The whole time we're watching the scanner fuel trim. Go around by the brake booster. Virtually anywhere air could be leaking into the intake. Now we're looking at the short term on bank 1. We're zoomed in so that you can see it well, but we're actually watching both banks. If I have propane sneaking into the intake, it should go through the combustion process, go out the oxygen sensor, it should see it, and the computer should start adjusting fuel. But as you can see, as we're going all over this intake, we've got no adjustment. So our propane didn't turn up any evidence. What would you do next? Add your comments, and then we'll watch the third video.